Have you ever felt like everyone loves you except you? You're polite, reliable, soft-spoken. You say yes when your soul is screaming no. You swallow words, not because you don't feel, but because you've learned that your truth makes others uncomfortable. And so, over time, you became smaller, gentler, quieter. But inside, a silent scream remains. A longing to be seen not as helpful, not as agreeable, but as real. Carl Jung would tell you, this isn't kindness, this is disappearance. You weren't born to be liked, you were born to be whole. There's a pain that people pleasers carry, not just the exhaustion of always giving, but the grief of never being known. And the more you abandon yourself to maintain peace, the more war you create within. That war ends now. Because this is not a video about being nicer. This is a descent into your shadow, the mask you were taught to wear, the guilt that was never yours to carry, and the sacred return to a voice you buried long ago. If you're ready to meet the you that never needed permission, follow me. We're not going to fix you, we're going to remember you, and if something in these words stirs your breath, if a quiet part of you whispers, "This is me," then I invite you to stay. Watch until the very end, because sometimes the truth doesn't shout, it unfolds softly, layer by layer. And if this space feels like a mirror for your soul, if it speaks to something unspoken within, support this channel. Subscribe. Share it with someone who's also tired of being invisible. You were never too much. You were just too silent for too long. Now, let's begin the return. Have you ever felt like the more agreeable you become, the more invisible you are? You're praised for being kind, admired for being flexible, trusted for always saying yes. But what no one tells you is this: kindness, when it comes from fear, is not virtue. It is self-erasure. Carl Jung called it the persona, a mask we build to survive, to be accepted, to avoid the sting of rejection. But wear a mask long enough, and you forget there was ever a face beneath it. You weren't born to please, you were trained to. Slowly, subtly. Taught that silence is strength, that saying no is selfish, that having needs makes you difficult. So you smile even when something aches. You nod even when your spirit wants to scream. You bend until you no longer remember what it feels like to stand. And people love you for it, but not because they know you. They love the version you've shown them, soft, safe, agreeable. They love the performance, and every time they clap, you lose a little more of the self that longs to be real. This isn't love, it's survival. And Jung would tell you, survival strategies don't make you whole, they make you hollow. You think you're helping. But what if every time you abandon your own needs, you're teaching the world that your soul is negotiable? What if, behind that polished exterior, there's a silent cry building inside you, not for approval, but for authenticity? Because here's the truth, the persona is never satisfied. It always needs another yes, another nod, another compromise. And it demands you stay quiet to keep the peace, even as that silence costs you your sanity. But something inside you is beginning to stir, isn't it? It's not rebellion, it's remembrance. So the question is no longer, how do I stay liked? It becomes, what part of me have I exiled just to survive in this mask? And if that question keeps you up at night, good. You're waking up. But waking up hurts. Because the moment you realize you've spent years performing for love, a quiet grief begins to unfold. Not loud, not chaotic, but a deep ache. The mourning of the self you betrayed just to be tolerated. Carl Jung warned us, people-pleasing is not a virtue. It is a wound in disguise. And the tragedy is this. It doesn't look like self-betrayal at fee. But slowly, you disappear. Every time you say yes when your soul is whispering no, you train the world to believe that your boundaries are optional, that your silence is consent, that your energy, your time, your presence can be accessed freely, without respect. And they will believe it. Not because they are cruel, but because you taught them to. This is not about blame. This is about clarity. You are not a victim of others. You are a participant in your own erasure. And until you name it, Jung would say, this is the shadow at work, not the dark, violent kind. Number. This is a far subtler demon. It wears a smile. It says all the right things, but it is terrified of rejection. It bends, shrinks, appeases, not out of love, but out of fear that if you take up space, you won't be loved at all. But how can anyone truly love you if they've never met you? The real you, the one with sharp edges, with wants, with wildness, with a spine. If that version of you has been hidden under layers of politeness and submission, then the approval you receive isn't love. It's applause for a role you never auditioned for. You were just born into it. And here's the cruel irony. The more you perform, the more you resent those around you for not seeing you. But how could they? You never showed them your real face. So you live with this quiet rage, not at them, but at yourself. Because deep down, you know, the betrayal didn't begin with them. It began with you. But you can stop. Right here. You can let this be the moment you no longer choose peace at the cost of your own soul, because to say no when you mean it is not cruelty. It's clarity, and to live in clarity, to be known, not just liked, is the beginning of everything you've been aching for. And now we arrive at the root, because no child is born a people pleaser. You were not born with the impulse to shrink yourself. You were not born afraid of your voice, your truth, your fire. That fear was taught, conditioned, installed like a survival code in the fragile heart of a child who just wanted to be loved. Somewhere along the line, you realized something painful, that your authenticity came with a cost. Maybe you cried and were told you were too much. Maybe you were excited and someone laughed. Maybe you told the truth and were punished. So you adapted. You smiled when you wanted to scream. You stayed quiet when your heart burned to speak. You chose peace, not because it was real, but because it was safer. Carl Jung called this the formation of the persona, the mask we create to survive society's expectations. But when the mask is built too early, too forcefully, it fuses to the face. And soon, even you can't remember who lives underneath it. That's what happened, isn't it? You became the good one, the helper, the quiet achiever, the one who never asks for too much. And at first, it worked. You got approval, smiles, maybe even love. But it was conditional, always conditional. You had to stay small to keep it, predictable, palatable. And every time you felt your truth rise, anger, pain, need, desire, you pushed it down like a shameful thing. But it didn't disappear. It just sank deeper. Into the shadow. Jung knew that whatever you repress does not die. It waits, it twists, it distorts, and it comes back. Not as clarity, but as anxiety, fatigue, depression, resentment, self-doubt that eats you from the inside out. Not because you're broken, but because you're divided. You've been living as two selves, the child who still fears abandonment, and the adult who's starving for truth. And this is the moment they meet. This is the moment you look back. Not to blame, but to understand. You see the scared little one who thought disappearing was the only way to be safe. and you finally say to them, "You don't have to do that anymore. I'm here now, and I will not abandon you for anyone." That's where healing begins. Not in becoming someone new, but in remembering the one you were before the world taught you to hide. But what happens when the mask becomes your face? At first it felt like protection, that smile, that tone, that way you nod even when you disagree. It made life smoother. You avoided conflict. You earned praise. You were called kind, patient, thoughtful. And maybe you even started to believe it. But slowly, the cost began to show. In the quiet moments, in the mirror, in the ache that wouldn't name itself. Because the truth is, the more you perform who you're supposed to be, the more you forget who you actually are. Carl Jung called this a loss of soul, not in some abstract, mystical sense, but in the very real, human experience of dissociation from your own essence. When your outer self becomes so perfectly constructed, so socially rewarded, it begins to devour the inner self. You don't feel alive, you feel strategic, tactful, controlled, but not whole. You start to notice it when you laugh and it feels hollow. When you're surrounded by people and feel completely alone. When someone thanks you for always being so easy, and all you want to do is scream. You've become a performance, a persona, and it's exhausting. Because deep down, you know, this isn't your real life. It's a curated one, a version of you optimized for approval, but sterilized of realness, rawness, rebellion. And the body keeps the score, the fatigue, the tightness in your chest, the dread when your phone rings, the collapse you feel after being on all day. These aren't random symptoms. They are signals, alarms, messages from the self, saying, "I'm still in here, let me out." Jung believed that the psyche longs for wholeness, not perfection, not popularity, but integration. And when one part of you dominates, when the mask becomes the master, the other parts, the wild, the angry, the honest, the weird, begin to rot in the shadow. And this is why you feel fake. Not because you are, but because you've built a life that only allows one narrow version of you to survive. But here's the thing. You're allowed to take it off. You're allowed to disappoint people. You're allowed to not be easy. You're allowed to say, "This version of me, the agreeable one, the polite one, the caretaker, is not all of me." Because the longer you wait for permission to be real, the more you abandon the life that could have been yours. And you deserve that life, not because you're perfect, but because you're you. Now, something is shifting. You've felt it, that quiet revolt inside. The longing not just to be liked, but to be known. And that is the beginning of your return. There comes a moment, or quiet, unceremonious, when you stop asking, "How can I keep everyone happy?" and begin asking, "What would it mean to finally be myself?" That moment is not the end of your people-pleasing. It is the beginning of your individuation. Carl Jung did not see this journey as mere self-help or emotional tidying. He called it a sacred psychological awakening, a slow, burning return to wholeness. And make no mistake, it is not gentle, it is not neat, it is not always kind. Because becoming whole means reclaiming what you once exiled, your no, your anger, your limits, your needs, the sacred ground where your real self was buried under politeness. It begins the first time you say, "No, thank you," and don't apologize. The first time you stop cushioning your truth to protect someone else's comfort. The first time you realize that silence is not peace, it's suffocation. You are not becoming cruel, You are becoming real. People won't like it. That's how you'll know it's working. They'll say you've changed, that you've become cold. But in truth, you've simply stopped bleeding for people who never brought you bandages. They'll call it selfish, but Jung would call it sacred. Individuation is the slow rebellion of a soul tired of wearing disguises. It's not the pursuit of being better. It's the embodiment of being true. And truth always has a cost. You may lose connections, but if they were built on your silence, your self-erasure, your softness, they were never truly relationships. They were arrangements, contracts signed by your fear. So you begin again. With trembling hands, with a hesitant voice, with a spine, you're still learning to trust. You begin to speak, not loudly, but honestly, not to hurt, but to exist. And something strange happens. The guilt begins to fade. At first, guilt screams. Every no feels like a betrayal. But over time, the volume lowers. The space expands. And in that space, yourself returns. Not the mask, not the act, but the version of you who remembers what joy feels like when it's not tied to approval. You're not here to be liked. You're here to live. So let the mask fall. Let the shadows rise. Let the fragments come home. Because this uncomfortable, shaky, radiant clarity, this is not the breakdown. This is your breakthrough. And it's only just beginning. You'd think awakening would feel like liberation, and in time, it will. But first, it feels like guilt. The kind that twists in your stomach the moment you say no. The kind that sits in your throat when you stop explaining yourself. The kind that whispers, "You're being selfish." This is not your failure. This is the sacred withdrawal from a life of performance. You are not doing something wrong. You are removing a mask that was glued to your soul for years, and it hurts. The guilt is not a signal to stop. It's a sign that your nervous system is detoxing from a lifetime of self-abandonment. Carl Jung warned us, the self doesn't awaken in comfort. It awakens in conflict. In the trembling decision to stop being what everyone wants and start becoming who you are, even if no one claps for it. You are not used to this. Of course it feels wrong. For years, love was earned by being nice. Safety came through silence. So when you finally speak, when you finally hold the line, every cell in your body screams, "Am I allowed to do this?" Yes, you are. You always were. You just forgot. This moment, this guilt, this fear, this disorientation, it's not the collapse. It's the clearing. A necessary burn before new roots can take hold. And every time you don't collapse under the guilt, you get stronger. Not louder, not harder, just grounded. That's how true confidence is born. Not in the roar, but in the stillness after the storm. In the moment you realize that peace isn't being liked. It's being undisturbed by being misunderstood. Let them misjudge you. Let them think you've become cold. Let them whisper that you've changed. Because they are not mourning your truth. They are mourning their control. This is your sacred purification. The fire that burns the lies. The silence that finally speaks. The boundary that doesn't beg to be respected, but simply exists. And when the guilt passes, because it will, what's left is something ancient, something unshakable. Not perfection, but sovereignty. You'll know it by the way your no longer trembles, by the way your yes no longer feels forced, by the way your presence enters a room not to please, but to be. You are not becoming hard, you are becoming clean. And when the soul is clean, it does not need to shout. It simply stands, Because when you stop people pleasing, you don't lose love, you lose manipulation, you lose imbalance, you lose one-sided relationships built on your silence, and in their place, something remarkable begins to arrive. The ones who stay are the ones who see you, not the performance, not the polite smile. You, your voice, your no, your unfiltered presence. They don't run from it. They respect it. This is not loneliness. This is refinement. A shedding of the false to reveal the sacred. Because the ones who were only ever drawn to your compliance were never your people. They were your mirror, reflecting how little you believed in your own worth. Now that mirror has cracked. And what's rising from the shards is someone impossible to betray again. You are not a bad person because you stopped sacrificing yourself. You are not cold because you said, enough. You are not selfish for putting yourself at the center of your own life. You are free, truly free. And that freedom doesn't scream. It hums, like a deep cello that reverberates through your bones. A silent knowing that you no longer belong to the script, the role, the mask. You belong to yourself. And once you taste that kind of sovereignty, once you know what it's like to move through the world unhooked from approval, you will never beg to be liked again. Carl Jung didn't want you to become someone else. He wanted you to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. So return. Return to that place inside you that never asked for permission. Return to the one who never needed to explain why their soul matters. Because the man or woman who stops pleasing isn't dangerous. They're awake, and their presence is the most honest form of love this world will ever know. Now take a breath, not the kind you've been taught to take, shallow, hurried, stolen between tasks, but a breath that says, I belong here, in this body, in this life, on my own terms. Because this isn't just a video, it's a remembering, a soul pulling itself out of performance and back into presence. And presence, my friend, is a radical act in a world built on pretending. You don't have to run to the mountains. You don't have to break all your relationships. You don't have to become a firestorm of rebellion. You just have to pause. Just long enough to notice when you're saying yes out of fear. Just long enough to feel the quiet ache when your truth goes unsaid. Just long enough to ask, am I betraying myself again? That question, simple, terrifying, holy, can save a life. It saved mine. You see, living authentically in this world doesn't mean being loud. It means being rooted. It means waking up and choosing not what will keep the peace, but what will keep you whole. When you say no now, you say yes to the self you've been longing to become. And maybe that self will cost you some relationships. Maybe some people will call you difficult, but your peace will call you home. Let it, because life will keep passing. Your to-do list will refill. The inbox will never empty. But the moments when you honor your truth, those are the moments that make you alive. Carl Jung said that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off what is unwanted, but by integrating it. So take your guilt, take your fear, take your softness, your shadow, your need to be loved, and bring them home. You are not here to be perfect. You are here to be real. And in that reality, there is strength, a quiet, holy strength that no one can take from you ever again. So go live, not as someone who is liked, but as someone who is true. If these words resonated with you, give the video a like, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to the channel. Not for the algorithm, but because this space is for souls that are waking up. Support us so we can keep walking this path together.